A school teacher in Osaka who never earned the equivalent of more than $50,000 in a single year can walk into retirement with more real security than an American physician billing $300,000. That gap has almost nothing to do with the size of the paycheck. It traces back to a small set of quiet habits, most of them centuries old, that the average Japanese household treats as ordinary common sense, while the average American household was simply never taught them. You don't need a raise to use a single one of these habits, and luck has nothing to do with it either. What you need is a different relationship with money. Over the next 40 minutes, I'm going to hand you all 10 of these habits, one at a time, and show you exactly what each one looks like inside an American budget in the year 2026. Before we get into the list, I want to clear up the thing almost everyone assumes about Japan, because it quietly changes how you'll hear everything that follows. People look at a place like Tokyo, with its neon districts and its bullet trains gliding past Mount Fuji, and they assume the wealth there grows out of enormous salaries. It doesn't. Japanese wages have been famously flat for 3 decades, barely moving while the cost of living crept upward. The average household there is not out-earning the average American household by some wide and obvious margin. What separates the two is not the size of the river flowing in. It's what each culture does with the water once it arrives. And here in the United States, what happens to the money after it arrives is genuinely difficult to watch. The personal savings rate sat at 4.5% in January of 2026, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which sounds acceptable until you learn that the 60-year historical average is closer to 8.5%. We are saving roughly half of what previous generations managed to save, in an era when we earn far more in absolute terms. Total credit card debt crossed $1.28 trillion at the end of 2025, an all-time record. The typical cardholder who carries a balance owes somewhere around $7,900, and at the average rate of about 21%, that single balance quietly drains more than $1,600 a year straight out of their life and into a bank's quarterly earnings report. It gets harder still when you factor in what's happening to the cost of ordinary life. Analysts at the Yale Budget Lab estimated that the tariffs rolling through the economy in 2026 are adding somewhere between $570 and $2,500 to the average household's annual costs, depending on what that family buys. That's money leaving American wallets and not coming back, layered on top of everything else. And when the Federal Reserve went looking, it found that fewer than half of American adults could comfortably cover a $1,000 emergency from their savings. So most of us are running a household with no buffer in a rising cost environment while paying a bank to borrow against our own futures. The question worth sitting with, then, is not how the Japanese manage to earn so much more. They frequently earn less. The real question is how an ordinary income, handled one way, hardens into lasting wealth in one country, while the same income, handled another way, dissolves into interest payments and cluttered garages in another. That entire answer lives inside these 10 habits. Let's begin. Number 1. Kakebo, the quiet power of writing it down by hand. In 1904, a woman named Hani Motoko, who would go on to become Japan's first female journalist, published a simple household ledger she called the Kakebo, which translates roughly to Household Financial Book. More than a century later, it is still in print, still sold in stationery shops across the country, and still used by millions of households who could just as easily download a sleek app and deliberately choose not to. There's a reason that choice keeps getting made. Here is what sets it apart from the budgeting tools most Americans have tried and quietly abandoned by February. A kakeibo gets filled in by hand, with a pen, usually at the kitchen table at the end of a long day. At the start of the month, you write down what you expect to earn and what you're obligated to pay. Then, every purchase gets recorded and sorted into 4 plain categories: things you need, things you want, things that enrich your life like books or culture, and the unexpected. When the month ends, you answer 4 reflection questions in writing. How much money did I have? How much did I actually spend? How much would I have liked to save? And what one thing can I change next month? That final step is the entire engine, and it happens to be the exact step every app on your phone strips out. When your spending is tracked automatically, you never genuinely feel any of it. The money leaves invisibly, the software sorts it into a tidy, color-coded chart you glance at for 2 seconds while half distracted, and nothing inside your brain actually shifts. Writing the number down by your own hand forces a small, deliberate moment of friction, a pause where you have to look the $11 lunch in the eye and decide, on paper, whether it was worth it. People who study consumer spending have shown for years that the more frictionless a payment becomes, the more freely we hand our money over, which is precisely why tapping a phone feels like nothing at all and counting out paper bills feels like something real. Picture how this would play out in your own life this week. You probably carry a comfortable, vague belief that you spend around $300 eating out each month. The American who actually records every meal by hand for 30 straight days almost always discovers the true figure is 450 or 520, and that gap between the gentle guess and the ugly truth is the precise money that was supposed to become savings and never did. You cannot fix a number you refuse to look at directly. So the Kakebo isn't really a budgeting system in the way Americans think of budgets, with rigid limits and guilt. It's a system for ending the small, comfortable lie you've been telling yourself about where your money actually goes. And that honesty, repeated once a month with a pen in your hand, quietly outperforms every app you've ever deleted. Number 2, mottainai, the deep refusal to waste. There is a single Japanese word that has no clean English translation, and once you truly understand it, you start to notice the exact hole where it should live in American culture. The word is mottainai. It's the feeling of regret over waste, the small internal wince you get when something still useful is thrown away or treated carelessly. Children in Japan absorb it early. A grandmother will murmur it over the last grain of rice left in a bowl. The word carries a faint, almost spiritual sense that objects deserve a kind of respect, and that discarding what still has life left in it is a small wrong against the world. Now set that mindset directly beside the American economy, which has been engineered from top to bottom to make you waste. Because waste is exactly where the profit hides. Take the humble subscription. You signed up for a streaming service to watch one show, you finished the show months ago, and that $11 has been slipping out of your account on autopilot ever since. Stack that across the 4 or 5 services the typical household now juggles, and you're looking at $60 to $100 a month bleeding out for things you barely open. Layer on the gym membership used twice since New Year's, the free trial that silently converted to paid, the cloud storage you can't remember signing up for. A person living with mottainai physically cannot tolerate this because each forgotten charge lands as a small wrong, and they hunt it down and cancel it on reflex. Run that audit yourself this week, and the number of dollars you free up will probably startle you. Food tells the same story even more plainly. The average American family throws away a meaningful share of the groceries it buys. Real food purchased with hard, after-tax dollars, carried home, refrigerated, and then scraped straight into the trash a week later. The waste is money you already worked for, decomposing quietly behind the milk. In a household guided by mottainai, the leftover rice becomes tomorrow's fried rice. The wilting vegetables become a pot of stock, and the refrigerator is treated as a resource to be managed rather than a place where grocery money goes to slowly rot. The most useful version of this habit, though, shows up at the cash register, before the money is even spent. Mottainai trains you to ask, in advance, whether the thing you're about to buy is going to be honored or wasted. Will the bread machine actually get used, or will it sit on the counter for 3 weeks and then quietly serve a 9-year sentence in a cabinet? Will the 4th pair of running shoes get run in, or simply admired. This is not deprivation, and that distinction matters enormously because Americans hear the phrase, "stop wasting," and immediately picture a grim, joyless life of going without. The reality runs the other way. When you stop buying the things you'll waste, the things you do buy get used completely and enjoyed fully, and the money that would have evaporated stays right where it belongs, in your hands, ready to grow. Number 3. Hara hachi bu, the 80% rule. On the island of Okinawa, which holds one of the highest concentrations of people living past 100 years old of anywhere on Earth, there's a phrase spoken quietly before meals, hara hachi bu. It means, more or less, eat until you are 80% full, not stuffed, not until the plate is scraped clean out of habit or guilt. You stop at the calm point of enough, while a little comfortable room still remains. It is part of why Okinawans have stayed lean and remarkably long-lived for generations. But the reason this old eating practice belongs in a video about building wealth is that the very same principle, redirected from your stomach to your paycheck, turns out to be the single most reliable wealth-building move in all of personal finance. Here is how it translates. Most American households live at 100% of their income, and a genuinely frightening number lives somewhere above it. The money arrives and the lifestyle expands instantly to swallow every dollar of it and then reaches for more, which is exactly why nearly a quarter of American households were classified as living paycheck to paycheck in 2025 by the Bank of America Institute, and why some broader surveys push that figure past half the country. There's no room left over. There's no margin to absorb a shock. So when the car finally breaks down, the only instrument within reach is the credit card sitting at 21%. Hara hachi bu, applied to money, says you deliberately build your whole life on 80% of what you earn, and you let the other 20 vanish before your eyes ever land on it. The personal finance world has a clumsier name for this same move. They call it paying yourself first. The Japanese framing is gentler and, honestly, more sustainable, because it isn't built around the language of sacrifice. You're not punishing yourself. You're simply stopping at enough, the same graceful way you'd push back from a wonderful meal while you still feel good, rather than eating yourself into discomfort. The 20% you didn't touch becomes the seed of every single habit that follows in this video, because none of the investing ideas coming up can work without margin to feed them. The genuinely encouraging part is how quickly both the body and the budget recalibrate. Someone earning, say, $60,000, who commits to living on 80%, is setting aside $12,000 a year. And yes, the very first month of that feels tight and a little uncomfortable. By the third month, though, spending has quietly reshaped itself around the new ceiling, and the difference goes unmissed. No more than an Okinawan grandmother mourns the last few bites of rice she chose not to take. The habit was never really about restriction. It's about calibration. You are teaching yourself where enough actually lives. And for almost everyone, it turns out to live comfortably below the line they'd been mindlessly spending up to for years. Number 4. Chokin, the discipline of saving and the honest friction of cash. Chokin is simply the everyday Japanese word for saving money, but it carries a cultural weight that the English word has almost entirely lost. In Japan, saving is not the optional thing you do with whatever happens to be left over after the fun is finished. It is the first, automatic, nearly moral act of running a household, taught to small children through their own little bank books and reinforced for generations by a postal savings system that served as the bedrock of family security across the entire country. Saving isn't framed as the dull obligation you'll eventually get around to. It's understood as the foundation you stand on while you build everything else. Hold that beside the American reality, and the contrast is almost painful. The Federal Reserve's most recent figures show that only somewhere around 47% of adults could pull $1,000 out of savings to handle a sudden emergency, and more than a quarter of adults report having essentially no emergency savings at all. So when the transmission gives out, When the molar cracks at midnight, when the layoff email lands, there's no buffer standing between the household and disaster, and the gap inevitably gets papered over with debt that compounds against them at 21%. That is the whole trap laid bare. Without savings, every emergency automatically converts into a loan, and every loan quietly makes surviving the next emergency that much harder. The spiral feeds itself. There's a second, almost invisible piece of chokin that the modern tap-to-pay eye tends to miss completely, and it's the deliberate use of physical cash. In Japan, even with all its famous technology, an enormous amount of daily spending still happens with actual paper money. And there's a long-standing envelope tradition where a household divides its cash into labeled categories at the start of each period. When the envelope marked for dining out is empty, dining out is finished until next month. The envelope does not negotiate, it does not extend credit, and it does not care how much you want the sushi. It simply runs out, and that's the end of the conversation. This matters far more than it first sounds, and it circles right back to that idea of friction. Handing over a $20 bill and watching the cash in your wallet visibly thin out activates a small, real signal in the brain that a frictionless card swipe deliberately bypasses. Study after study has confirmed that people spend meaningfully more when paying digitally, precisely because the pain of payment has been engineered away for the benefit of the merchant. The chokin household turns that friction into a tool and uses it on purpose. They treat the emergency fund as a non-negotiable first bill, paid before anything fun, and for the categories that always seem to spiral, the groceries and the dining and the small daily wants, they bring back the honest little sting of physical money. Try it for 30 days. Pull out cash for your two leakiest categories, and notice how differently you behave when the wallet in your hand keeps getting visibly lighter. Number 5. Tsumitate and the new NISA, the quiet machine of automatic investing. This is the habit that matters most of all, so stay close with me here, because this is the exact point where saved money stops merely sitting still and starts multiplying on its own. For decades, the Japanese carried a reputation as world-class savers who somehow refused to invest. Households were sitting on something close to 2 quadrillion yen in total assets, roughly $15 trillion, and well over half of that mountain was parked in plain cash accounts, earning almost nothing year after year. The government wanted to break that habit, so in January of 2024, it rolled out a completely redesigned version of an account called the NISA, the Nippon Individual Savings Account. The new version is genuinely impressive. Normally in Japan, investment gains get taxed at about 20%, the same kind of bite an American taxable account takes. Inside the new NISA, that tax disappears entirely. The account never expires, and a single household can shelter up to 18 million yen for the rest of its life. The part I really want you to lock onto, though, is the engine humming inside the account, called tsumitate. Tsumitate means regular, automatic, fixed contributions. The same amount of money invested on the same day, every single month, into broad, low-cost funds, without the investor ever checking the price, trying to time the market, or honestly thinking about it much at all. The Japanese even have a comfortable phrase for the whole approach. They call it investing and forgetting. If that idea sounds familiar to you, it absolutely should, because Americans already hold the exact same tools in their hands, and most people barely touch the magic buried inside them. Your 401k is a tsumitate machine, contributing automatically from every paycheck before the money ever reaches your checking account. Your Roth IRA is a tax-free wrapper that works just like the NISA. The IRS announced that for 2026, you can place up to $24,500 into a 401k and $7,500 into an IRA. And inside a Roth, every dollar of growth comes back out in retirement completely tax-free, the very same gift the new NISA hands to Japanese savers. If your employer matches any part of your 401k and you're not capturing that match, you are walking past free money on the sidewalk every 2 weeks. Now watch the engine actually run. The American stock market, measured by the S&P 500, has returned roughly 10% a year on average across its entire history. Picture an ordinary person who simply automates the whole thing, who sets up the monthly contribution and then forgets it exists, the pure tsumitate way. At that long-run average, $10,000 left completely alone for 30 years grows into more than $189,000. They didn't pick a single winning stock. They never once watched the financial news. They did nothing anyone would call clever or sophisticated. They just kept quietly feeding the machine and, more importantly, refused to interrupt it. That refusal is the whole secret. The reason the Japanese government built an entire tax-free system specifically to make this behavior automatic is that automation removes the single most destructive variable in the entire equation, which is you, reacting emotionally at the worst possible moment. Now make it personal with a number you might actually live. Say you set up an automatic $500 a month, the same day every month, into a broad index fund inside that Roth, and then walk away. At the market's long-run average, that quiet, unglamorous habit grows into well over $1 million across a working career. And because it's sitting inside a Roth, you never owe the tax collector a cent of that growth on the way out. Here's the detail that catches people off guard, though. The large majority of that final pile is not the money you contributed. It's the growth on the growth, the compounding stacked on top of compounding, which only shows up if you leave it completely undisturbed for decades. The person who panics during a downturn and pulls the money out doesn't just lose a few bad years. They quietly amputate the most explosive stretch of growth, the part that was still waiting patiently out in the future. Automate it, then leave it alone. That's the entire instruction. Number 6. Kaizen, the art of getting 1% better. After the Second World War, Japanese manufacturing rebuilt itself around a single idea that would eventually make a company like Toyota one of the most admired and durable businesses on Earth. The idea is called Kaizen, and it means continuous improvement through small, steady steps. Not one heroic leap, not a dramatic, photogenic overnight transformation. Instead, 1,000 tiny refinements, each one almost too small to notice on its own, compounding patiently over years into a result the competition simply cannot match. The reason so many American money resolutions die in a ditch by spring is that they reject Kaizen entirely and reach instead for the heroic leap. Someone decides on January 1st that they will now save a quarter of their income, cook every single meal from scratch, and never again set foot inside a store for anything but necessities. The change is enormous. The willpower it demands is impossible to sustain, and by the middle of February, the whole ambitious project has collapsed in a heap, leaving the person feeling like a failure who's simply bad with money. Big leaps look impressive on day one and almost never survive contact with an actual human life. The Kaizen approach to your finances is almost laughably gentle by comparison, which is exactly why it works. You don't jump from saving 5% of your income to saving 25%. You go from 5 to 6. Next quarter, you nudge it from 6 to 7. On a $60,000 salary, that first 1% step is about $50 a month, a number so small your lifestyle never even registers the loss. And yet, the direction of your whole financial life has now been permanently set toward wealth. Many American 401k plans actually have this idea built directly into them, a quiet setting called auto-escalation that raises your contribution by 1% every year entirely on its own. And the people who flip that switch on almost always report that they never once felt a single one of those annual increases. Then you apply the very same gentle logic everywhere else. This month, you renegotiate exactly one bill. maybe the insurance or the phone plan. Next month, you swap one expensive habit for a cheaper version that you honestly enjoy just as much. The month after that, you automate one more transfer into the investing machine. No single move on its own changes your life, and that's the entire point, because that's precisely why each one sticks where the heroic leap shattered. A year later, you glance up and realize your whole financial system has quietly reorganized itself around saving and investing. Without a single white-knuckled moment of sacrifice, you had to grit your teeth and endure. Wealth, the Japanese understood long ago, is not an event you arrive at. It's the slow accumulation of unremarkable days handled just slightly better than the day before. If this way of thinking about money is landing for you, it's worth subscribing, because this calm, long-view lens is the one we bring to every single topic on this channel. Now let's keep moving, because the next habit is hiding in plain sight inside your home right now. Number 7. Danshari, the strange wealth in owning less. You've almost certainly heard of Marie Kondo and her idea of keeping only the things that spark joy. But that's the gentle, softened version that got exported to the West. The sharper Japanese concept underneath it is called Danshari. The three characters that make up the word mean, roughly, to refuse, to dispose, and to separate. Refuse what you don't need before it ever crosses your threshold. Dispose of what no longer serves a purpose in your life. And separate yourself from the quiet grip that possessions hold over your mind and your money. It's less about a photogenic, tidy closet and far more about a clear, unsentimental relationship with everything you own. Here is why this is genuinely a money habit and not merely a lifestyle aesthetic for design blogs. Every object you own carries a second price tag, one you paid absolutely no attention to back at the register. The first cost is the sticker price you saw and agreed to. The second cost is everything that comes afterward. The space the object occupies in a home you pay for by the square foot, the time you spend cleaning and maintaining and storing it, the low hum of mental weight that comes from managing one more thing, and the opportunity cost of all the cash now frozen solid inside it. A garage packed wall-to-wall with rarely used gear is not, despite how it feels, a collection of valuable assets. It's a pile of dead money that you are now also paying to babysit, which is exactly why Americans collectively rent hundreds of millions of square feet of self-storage to warehouse belongings they couldn't bring themselves to release and will, in all honesty, never use again. Danshari kills the impulse purchase right at its source, because under this mindset, before anything is allowed to enter the home, it first has to justify itself against all of that hidden, ongoing cost. The habit also reframes the entire idea of value around one simple, almost surgical question, which is cost per use. A $400 jacket worn exactly twice costs you $200 every single time you put it on. A $100 jacket worn 200 times costs you 50 cents a wearing. By that honest math, the expensive thing you genuinely use turns out to be the real bargain, and the cheap thing you grabbed on a whim and then ignored turns out to be the genuine waste, regardless of what the price tag said. The Danshari mind buys less, buys better, uses what it owns completely, and routes all of that freed up money straight into the automatic investing machine we talked through a few minutes ago. Owning less, against every instinct American advertising has trained into you, turns out to be one of the fastest roads to owning more. Number 8. Shinise, the patience of 1,000 years. Japan is home to something the rest of the world can barely wrap its head around. The country holds thousands of businesses that are literally centuries old, enterprises the Japanese call Shinise, long-established houses handed carefully down through dozens of generations. The most staggering example is a construction company called Kongo Gumi, founded in the year 578 to build a Buddhist temple in Osaka, and it operated continuously as a family business for roughly 1,400 years. Let that timeline actually register for a second. That company was already more than 1,000 years old before the Mayflower ever left England. Japan occupies the top several positions on the entire list of the oldest surviving businesses on the planet. Most of them ancient inns and temple builders that simply refused to die. You do not build something that endures for 14 centuries by chasing the hot trend of any given season. You build it through patience, through a time horizon so vast it makes ordinary quarterly thinking look like a kind of frantic madness. And that exact patience happens to be the single rarest and most valuable trait an investor can ever possess, because the market rewards it and punishes its absence with almost cruel mathematical precision. Look closely at what happens to the people who simply cannot sit still. The American stock market returned around 10% a year over the long run, as we covered. Yet a now famous study by J.P. Morgan found that the average investor actually earned only about 2.9% over the period they studied. Read that one more time and let the size of the gap sink in properly. The market generously handed out 10, and the typical human being managed to catch less than 3. So where did all the rest of it disappear to? It was destroyed by impatience, plain and simple. It was lost by selling in a blind panic when prices dropped, by buying in a greedy frenzy when prices had already run up, by hopping from one shiny thing to the next, by treating a 1,400-year compounding machine like a slot lever to be yanked every nervous Tuesday afternoon. The Shinise mindset does the precise opposite, and it does so deliberately and without apology. It chooses an investment, a strategy, a clear direction, and then it commits with a seriousness that borders on stubborn. It rides out the inevitable downturns without flinching, because it stubbornly measures success in decades rather than in the jittery squiggle of a chart over a single afternoon. When the headlines are screaming and everyone in the group chat is selling in a frenzy, the only question the Shinise investor bothers to ask is the same one Kongo Gumi's families asked across 40 unbroken generations. Will this still matter in 20 years? If the honest answer is yes, you hold, and you keep holding. That single, unglamorous act of holding, of flatly refusing to interrupt the compounding, is worth more than every hot stock tip you will ever be handed for the rest of your life. Number 9. Wabi-sabi, the quiet freedom of enough. There's a Japanese aesthetic philosophy called wabi-sabi, and it finds genuine beauty in things that are imperfect, weathered, and incomplete. A cracked tea bowl lovingly repaired with a seam of gold. A wooden beam worn smooth and dark by a century of passing hands. It is the deep cultural opposite of the glossy, flawless, endlessly upgraded ideal that American advertising sells you during every waking minute of your day. And that one quiet difference in taste quietly turns out to be worth a small fortune over the arc of a lifetime. The enemy you're really fighting here has a clinical name that psychologists use: the hedonic treadmill. It describes the relentless way human beings adapt to anything good almost the instant they get it. You land the raise, and within a few short months, it is melted into your new normal, and you find yourself needing more. You buy the bigger house, the newer car, the slightly nicer phone, and the thrill from each one evaporates right on schedule, leaving you reaching almost immediately for the next purchase, just to feel that same brief, fading spark. This is lifestyle creep, and it is the silent, unglamorous reason that so many genuinely high earners end up just as broke and anxious as everyone else, sprinting faster and faster on a belt that never once lets them actually arrive anywhere. Remember that doctor earning $300,000 from the very start of this video? People in exactly that position so often have nothing saved precisely because every raise they ever got was instantly swallowed whole by a slightly larger life. Wabi-sabi steps calmly off the treadmill. It locates contentment in what already is, in the imperfect but entirely sufficient, And that hard-won contentment is the single most underrated financial tool in existence. Because a person who has genuinely decided they have enough becomes quietly immune to the entire machine that was built to extract their money. They don't upgrade the phone that still works perfectly well. They don't trade the paid-off car for a shiny new monthly payment. They find the worn, the simple, and the lasting to be genuinely beautiful, which means the relentless marketing slides right off them like rain off a roof. And every dollar that isn't out chasing the next quick hit of newness flows straight and silent into that patient compounding machine instead. Enough, it turns out, is not the sad and limiting word that advertising has trained you to fear. It's the password that unlocks the door to freedom. Number 10. Ikigai, the reason worth getting up for. The 10th and final habit isn't about spending or saving at all, and yet it may quietly be the most important one of the whole list, because it's the bedrock that the other 9 all rest upon. The Japanese hold a concept called Ikigai, which translates loosely as your reason for being, the thing that genuinely pulls you out of bed in the morning. In the longevity hotspots of Okinawa, people frequently don't even have a real word for retirement in the Western sense of simply stopping cold. They hold on to a purpose, a craft, a role in the community, a garden to tend, well into their 90s and beyond. And the researchers who keep traveling there to study why these communities live so astonishingly long keep circling back to this exact sense of ongoing purpose as one of the central reasons. So why does an ancient philosophy about purpose belong at the close of a video about money? Because purpose is the thing that makes all 9 of the other habits actually sustainable over a lifetime, and it's what finally puts money back in its proper, humble place. When you have a clear Ikigai, money quietly stops being the scoreboard you're forever losing on and becomes the simple tool it was always meant to be. You're no longer grinding away to hit some abstract dollar figure that the next promotion will only inflate again anyway. Instead, you're patiently building the freedom to spend your one short, finite life on the things that genuinely matter to you. And that single piece of clarity is what makes the 80% living feel easy, the patient investing feel obvious, and the endless treadmill of upgrades finally feel pointless. It also gently reframes the entire goal of all this careful work. The standard American dream sells a vision of retirement as a hard and total stop, the long-awaited day you finally claw your way out of a life you never enjoyed and then do nothing at all. The Ikigai version is something different and, frankly, far healthier. The aim was never to stop. The aim is to build up enough quiet financial security that your work gradually becomes a choice you make freely rather than a sentence you're serving, so that you can pour your real energy into the thing you'd happily keep doing whether or not it ever paid you a cent. That is a genuinely wealthier life than almost any salary on earth can purchase. And the remarkable part is that it sits within reach of a schoolteacher in Osaka and a nurse in Ohio in equal measure, because it was never truly about the size of the income in the first place. So there they all are, the full 10, the handwritten honesty of Kakebo, the deep refusal to waste in mottainai, the 80% calibration of hara hachi bu, the first and automatic saving of chokin, the set-it-and-forget-it investing of tsumitate, tucked inside a tax-free account. The 1% steps of Kaizen. The ownless clarity of Danshari. The 1,000-year patience of Shinise. The contentment of Wabi-sabi. And the steady purpose underneath every bit of it, Ikigai. Notice what is completely absent from that list. There's no trick anywhere on it. No hot stock, no overnight side hustle, no secret formula that only the rich are allowed to know. Every single one of these habits is boring, repeatable, and almost embarrassingly simple. And that ordinariness is the exact reason they work, and the exact reason they keep working across entire generations. Wealth was never once built by the dramatic, photogenic move. It gets built by the quiet, unremarkable one, repeated faithfully until it stops being something you do and simply becomes who you are. Before we finish, though, I want to be honest with you about something, because it would be irresponsible to hand you 10 habits and pretend that's the entire picture. Every habit you just learned sits squarely on top of a single foundation, and when that foundation is missing or cracked, none of the habits actually hold their weight. That foundation is plain financial literacy, the basic working knowledge of how money truly behaves out in the world. It's understanding why a 21% credit card will outrun a 4% savings account every time, so you instinctively know which one to attack first with your spare dollars. It's grasping how compound interest can be the most loyal ally you'll ever have, or the most patient enemy, depending entirely on which side of it you happen to be standing on. It's knowing the real difference between a Roth and a traditional account before you ever put a dollar into either one, because choosing wrong there can quietly cost you tens of thousands of dollars you will simply never see. Here's the uncomfortable truth underneath all of it. A great deal of the reason these 10 habits are second nature in Japan and so rare here in America traces back to a literacy gap, a difference in what ordinary people were taught about money long before they ever earned a paycheck of their own. You can carry all the discipline in the world, but if you don't understand the basic rules of the game you're playing, that discipline simply gets aimed in the wrong direction. And even the best habits, built on a shaky foundation, will eventually buckle. The most expensive mistakes in all of personal finance almost never come from laziness or weak willpower. They come from not knowing, from doing precisely the wrong thing with total, confident conviction. That's why, if any of this genuinely resonated with you today, the truly smart next step isn't to rush out and open 6 new accounts by tomorrow afternoon. It's to make absolutely sure the foundation underneath these habits is solid before you start building on it. There's a video right here on this channel that walks through financial literacy from the ground floor up, the real and honest starting point for anyone setting out on their money journey. And it was built specifically to help you sidestep the early, costly, and heartbreakingly common mistakes that quietly derail so many people before they ever truly get going. So make that one your next stop. Get the fundamentals locked firmly into place, and then come right back to these 10 habits with fresh eyes. Because the moment you actually understand the rules of the game, these quiet Japanese practices stop being interesting trivia about a faraway culture and become the exact working blueprint for a life of lasting, unbothered, generational wealth. The kind of wealth that, much like a temple building company still standing in Osaka, was patiently built to last far, far longer than you.